In this video, we're going to be looking at measures of center. This is a type of descriptive statistics. So imagine you took a sample of employees at a certain company and just collected some income information from them. So it looks like the highest income level was about $98,000, the lowest was about $12,000, and we'd like to be able to describe these incomes to someone else. Now, we probably would not want to just give the whole list to a person, especially if our data set was very large, maybe hundreds or thousands of salaries. So we have to come up with some sort of way to describe the incomes without having to look at all of the data. So what we're really looking at in this section is what we would normally think of as the average. Now, in statistics, we don't like to use the term average, so you can think of this as an average, but the word average is just a little bit vague. There's lots of different types of averages or ways to measure the center, so we're not going to use the term average. But most of the time when we talk about average in everyday life, what we mean is something called the mean. And you've probably used this before. For example, when you calculate grades, that's usually a mean average. So what the mean is, we want to take all of our data values, all of these incomes, add them all up, and then divide by the number. And the way we write this in symbols is this capital Greek letter sigma, which we'll see in several formulas later on. And this just means sum or add up. So we say sigma of x, meaning add up all of the data values. So we're going to add up all of these salaries, and then we divide that by n. So what this really means is that we're going to be taking all of our data values, adding them all up, right, taking the sum, and then dividing by however many we have. In this case, there are 10 incomes listed in our data set. So go ahead, you can pause the video if you want, and go ahead and compute the mean of this data set, and I'll do that as well. So here's the sum of all of our data values, and then I'm just going to take this number and divide by 10, and this gives us the mean. So our mean in this case is $33,034.40. Right. So in layman's terms, we would say that this is the average salary of an employee, but this would be the mean of our salary data. So this is not the only method of computing a center value. The next one the next type of center value we want to talk about is called the median. And the median is also fairly frequently used, but it's computed in a very different way. So the idea of the median is that first we're going to put the data values in order. So biggest to smallest or smallest to biggest, it doesn't really matter. And in this case, we can just do that by hand. If you had a very large data set, you'd probably be using Excel or a calculator or something like that. So we want to put them all in order, and then we're really looking for the middle value. So the median is the value that's right in the middle once we put our data in order. So I have the data put in order here. And again, you can just do this by hand since we only have 10 values. And you'll notice that because we have an even number of values, there really isn't a middle value. Right in the center would be between values 5 and value 6. And what we do in this case is that we're just going to take the average or the mean, the number halfway in between these two numbers. So we'll just add up these two numbers, divide by 2, and that will be our median. So in this case, our median comes out to $25,108. Okay, and we're going to talk in a little bit about the main differences between mean and median, but at this point these are just sort of two methods of measuring the center of our data set. Okay, the next method is called the mode, And you might know the term mode from a la mode, which in the US we think of as with ice cream, but that comes from a French phrase which means something like in the fashion of the day or as is popular. So you can remember that the mode is basically the most popular value. The mode is going to be the value that shows up most often. If you have put your data in order already, this is usually not too hard to identify. In this case, we have 2 of the 18,900 values, and so that would be our mode in this particular data set. Not every data set will have a mode. It's possible to have more than one. If there was another data value that showed up twice here, we would have 2 modes. We would say our data was bimodal. But if there's more than 2 modes, and in particular if all of the data values only show up once or all of them showed up twice, we would just say that there is no mode. So the mode is less often used, but there are some situations where a mode makes a lot of sense. And one thing that you can use the mode for is for non-numerical data, right? We don't have to add or subtract or anything. We're just looking for the value that comes up most often. So you can imagine if you surveyed your friends about what type of pizza they wanted, maybe you'd just order the type that most people wanted, since you can't really average something like pepperoni and cheese. Okay, and then one more type is the midrange. And it's easy to get the midrange and the median confused, but these are not the same thing. So the midrange is the number halfway in between the highest value and the lowest value. So as I've done here, we just want to look at the highest value, which in our case is 98,213. The lowest value, 12,500. We're going to add them together, divide by 2. This is getting our number right in the middle of those 2. So in this case, our mid-range comes out to 55,356 and 50 cents. Think about this as if you took all of your data values and put them on a number line, a little wiggly number line, right? We've got the highest value up top, the lowest value at the bottom, and the mid-range really doesn't look at anything else. So it's always going to pick the number right in between here. And whether your data values are spread out evenly all the way across or not, we could have one low value way down here and then a whole bunch of high values way up at the high end of the range, but our mid-range is still going to be right in the middle here. So the mid-range only takes into consideration the high and low values, whereas the median, we're looking at, for example, listing out all the values along the number line and then just picking the one that fell in the middle. Okay, so now that we've talked about the 4 measures of center that we're interested in, we'd like to be able to compute these using the calculator. With our data set with only 10 numbers, we can definitely compute these by hand, and you should definitely know how to find all of these values by hand. If I can get my calculator to turn on. But for a larger data set, it would be impractical to do all of this by hand. So the first thing we'll have to do is to enter the data into the calculator. So this is using the TI-83 or 84. They'll be pretty similar. And we're going to go into the Stat menu, so that's the Stat button, and we're going to pick this first option that says Edit, and we're going to enter in our data values to list 1. You can use other lists, but it's easiest just to use the first one. So I'll clear out what I've got in here by hitting clear and enter on our list 1, and go ahead and enter the data into your list 1. Alright, so I've got my data entered in here. I put the data in order, but it doesn't actually matter. They don't need to be in numerical order in order to enter this in. Once you've got them entered in, go ahead and quit, do your second mode button, and then we're going to go back into our Stat menu, but over to the right once, where it says Calc. And we're going to have it calculate what they call one variable statistics. So that's option 1. So I'll select option 1. We don't need any additional arguments since our data is in list 1, so just press enter. And it's going to give you a whole list of information. And we're going to use a lot of this information later, but at this point I really just want to notice the first piece of data, which says X bar. X bar is the notation we use for the mean. So this is saying that the mean of our data is 33,034.4, and that's what we found before. You'll notice this n value, that was the number of data values we have. So that's a good thing to check. Just make sure you didn't leave one out or add an extra in. So we have 10 data values. And if you scroll down, you can see the rest of the information. It's giving you the min value, the max value, these quartiles, which we haven't talked about quite yet, but right in the middle it says MED, and that is our median. And from our min and max values, we can compute the mid-range. Remember, we're just taking the sum of the high and low values and dividing by 4, just like we did before. Now, one thing that the calculator does not give you is the mode. So that's something that you would have to compute or figure out just by looking at the data. The last thing I want to mention here is about the differences between the mean and the median. These are the most commonly used measures of center of the 4 that we've talked about, and they differ in some important ways. So I want to look at this salary data again and imagine that instead of having this high value of 98,000, that when we did our survey, we also ended up checking the salary of the CEO, for example, and that CEO made $1 million. So my question is, how would that $1 million affect the mean and the median? Well, with the mean, since we're adding up all of the numbers and dividing by 10, when we throw in this 1 million value, the mean is going to be much larger. However, the median will stay exactly the same. Right? If these numbers are in order, our median is still going to be halfway in between the two middle numbers, just like it was before. So changing that largest number to 1 million keeps the median the same. So what this means is that the mean is sensitive to changes in high and low values, whereas the median is not. And sometimes you would want these high or low outliers to count, and sometimes not. Often if you see statistics about income in the US for families, household income, it's typically the median that is used because we don't want to have a few very, very high incomes to influence our average or our measure of center. In this salary example, if we wanted that $1 million to be factored in, we might want to use the mean. But if we are trying to talk about sort of a typical or average employee, the $1 million is not particularly relevant. So a median would be a better choice in that case. So keep this in mind when you're talking about mean and median in different problems, and try and think about what information is more relevant to what you're trying to study. All right, so here's a question for you to look at. We've got some data values here that are wait times for a bank in minutes. So go ahead and first do mean, median, and mode and the mid-range by hand, and then go ahead and do this calculator program and check that you're getting the same values for both. That's all. See you for the next video.